for taking your time out to come and see what it is that we're doing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share a few slides and talk about kind of RankedRight at a high level, holistically talk about vulnerability management as a problem, what vulnerability management is, you know, what people think it might be, some of the problems that are kind of being faced in this space, and what I've seen kind of out in the wild, and then talk a little bit about RankedRight and give a demo of the platform that we've been building.
I'll tell you what I didn't say, Thomas, and that is probably the most relevant thing, which is your own personal background in the industry. Is it worth me just asking you to cover that off quickly?
Sure, yeah. So I've got over 10 years of experience in cybersecurity, both from an offensive cybersecurity background and also in vulnerability management. I've done various different roles starting in like pen testing. I then made a very strange career swap into business development and sales. I then took on a commercial director role, where I built the transport cybersecurity practice at NCC Group. I then moved over to IBM, where I was an associate partner there, looking after their X-Force Red team, which was, by the time that I left, about 70 to 80 people focusing on penetration testing and vulnerability management. And all of those guys kind of reported up to me. I ran Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And then yeah, in February this year, I left IBM to start and join the RankedRight venture, which we'll talk about. Cool. So yeah, what I'll do is if I share my screen, and what I'm going to do is put it into presenter mode now. If I didn't mean to do that. Hang on. In fact, this is fine. So, can you guys see my screen okay? Perfect. So, we're a technology company, a SaaS-based technology company. We focus on assisting organizations in streamlining and making their vulnerability management process more efficient. We've been around now since, well, the business was founded in October by my co-founder, Peter. As I mentioned, I joined the business in February. And from that moment, we rapidly kind of went out and raised some money. So we closed our kind of pre-seed round within 20 days and raised just over $500,000. And that kind of $500,000 there is to kind of get from a MVP that we built like super quick to a product that's worthwhile and is gonna help people with a huge roadmap in sight. And we're now in the process of kind of bringing customers on board. So I kind of mentioned this. I've mentioned that what we're looking to help companies do is gain better insight into the vulnerabilities that they have within their environment from all of the various different sources that they may get them from, so that they can help make the best decisions for themselves. That's a really key kind of point to what RankedRight is all about. We've seen time and time again that different like tools and products focus on helping make decisions based upon kind of industry standards. What we're looking at doing is providing a platform that allows organizations to build their own rules and priorities so that they can start working on remediating those vulnerabilities. Aside from myself in the business, there are two others. There's our co-founder, he's called Peter. His background is in business operations, sales operations, but also has spent some time in the cybersecurity industry as well. He came from a company called Checkmarks, and prior to that, he was the VP of operations at another cybersecurity SaaS business called Code Bashing, which was basically like education and developer training in cybersecurity. And then we've got Kristen. Kristen's our CTO. Kristen is kind of a huge technologist at heart. So he's spent the last 20 years developing and building some of the largest kind of publicly used systems in the world. So as an example, ITV Player, he was the lead developer on. Also, For On Demand, he was the lead developer on. Virgin Media are owned by a company called Liberty Global, who are a huge global company that provide media services to countries all over the world. He built the Liberty Go and / Virgin Media Go platform, and led that whole kind of end-to-end integration. So we have a very kind of widespread team in terms of experience. Mine is kind of on the ground delivering and leading teams in vulnerability management. Peter has been in the startup world before and has worked in this kind of fast-paced environment from, he joined pre-revenue and they were acquired in 18 months. And then Kristen has built huge scalable performance solutions that have been utilized by, millions of people all over the world. So jumping kind of straight into vulnerability management, the first thing that I'll say is that when you talk about vulnerability management to, I guess, less experienced individuals within the industry, they get confused and think that vulnerability management is basically about vulnerability scanning, and that isn't the case at all. And in fact, it's actually one of the major problems. Like, people that I've spoken to recently, who we're looking to honestly try and sell to, you say, what's your vulnerability management process like? And they say, oh well, we're just scanning our environment. That isn't a vulnerability management program. That is just the identification. So what I've listed here are kind of 5 core themes that kind of form the basis of a good vulnerability management program. Now, different organizations will call these different things and they will bring things together. But in terms of the way that I like to kind of explain vulnerability management, I feel like this is the best approach. So the first piece of the puzzle is you need to identify your vulnerabilities and your risks, right? But the way that you do that requires you to have a good understanding and have some form of inventory of your assets. And I think Ben spoke about this in the conversation that he was talking about, the presentation that he gave last week and the week before. Understanding, what you have so that you can then figure out how to defend it is like probably the most basic principle of cybersecurity.
Would you say, Thomas, that it's also one that hasn't been addressed by many people, which is probably the reason we've got this whole confusion on vulnerability management meaning?
Yeah, so it's a really good point, actually. So you look at the ways that individuals and organizations try to basically create these inventories. There's so many different methods in which they're able to do that. And sometimes variation is a really good thing. But ultimately, sometimes the most easiest way of doing something is the best way, at least to start with. And I worked with a global financial institution that were scanning hundreds of thousands of assets every single week, and their asset inventory, you might not believe, but was actually just in an Excel spreadsheet, because they had tried to utilize different tools to kind of manage their assets, but actually, the easiest way, the thing that they were able to keep up to date the most, was in that Excel spreadsheet. So yeah, for me, nobody is doing this right. There are some organizations out there now, like Jeremiah Grossman, who's a big name in security, has an asset discovery tool that I can't quite remember the name of, that I've never seen, but I've heard from a lot of people who I respect that it's good, but yeah, it's still a problem. The other point on that, by the way, that I'll say is the amount of times where an organization has said to me, this is my asset inventory, and then we've ran a vulnerability scan utilizing like an appliance like within their environment, and we found like 10% more assets, is astounding. And you'll see it kind of when we go through the demo, but I've actually found that a good kind of vulnerability management program that with good identification of assets as part of the scanning is actually the best approach to identifying what assets you have within your environment. But we can talk about that another time. And then the final point around identification, by the way, is ensuring that it's frictionless, that it's repeatable. It's no good having to kind of do something, and then a week later having to do it again, and a week later having to do it again. Ensuring it's scheduled, the profiles are correct, and there are kind of some form of process around that is super important. And once you've moved from identification, the analysis phase is typically should be light touch. What you'll see as organizations start to build their vulnerability management program is these first two phases. I should have probably drawn these as a wheel, but these first two phases are very quick. Like you run a scan, you do an analysis, you figure out that there's something strange going on with the way that you're scanning, so you make a change to the profile, and then you analyze it again, and you make a change to your profile again, and that kind of like loop in the. Let me see if I can. Where's my mouse gone? My mouse is gone. Never mind. That kind of loop is like really important to ensure that like later on down the line, from an efficiency perspective, you're kind of driving the best results. We then start to see things like reappearing vulnerabilities. You think you fixed them. Why are they back? Reviewing kind of light touch review from last month. Are we getting better? Or are we getting worse? The big kind of piece of the puzzle is the triage element. And that's what we'll be speaking about mostly today. Action is essentially, what do I do now I've got this vulnerability and I know that it's something that needs to be remediated? So I know who the owner is. I understand the kind of political landscape that I have to go through to kind of accept a risk or defer a risk for a later date. And we have some form of process in place to confirm a vulnerability has been closed, whether that be kind of re-ingesting identification data to rescanning the environment or doing some kind of manual verification. And then the final point is reporting. So how can you show improvement? Ultimately, I've seen vulnerability management programs sell for in excess of $15 million just for the services and the identification of vulnerabilities, right? That isn't including kind of any additional technology other than just the scanner. It's all then just services. If somebody is going to spend even a few $100,000 on vulnerability management, there needs to be a return on investment for it, and you need to show that you're improving over time. There needs to be some trend analysis that says, we have this many critical vulnerabilities, but now we have this many, and over time we can predict that we're going to be at this point in the future. And you need to be able to deliver something that's understandable to the executive team, and whether that be your immediate line manager or if you report into the board or to the C-suite. That is the most important part of the whole puzzle, because without getting that right, you're not going to be given the budget for any of the rest of it.
I think, Thomas, this is the bit that I've been so impressed with what both you and Ben have done, actually, in that relaying it to people, because business owners aren't like you guys. They're not technical, or they don't tend to be. You could liken them more to market traders. Probably they're more likely to have that skill set than they are a technical background. So this is an extremely technical subject, and anything that can dumb it down and help you report that to those people, I think, is an absolute winner. But I'll shut up again now.
It's all right, mate. So in summary, identification, finding your vulnerabilities, analysis, ensuring that the vulnerabilities that have been identified are legitimate. There's no kind of major issues with the data, because you don't want to spend time triaging wrong data. Then the triage piece is, well, what do I do now? I have thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of vulnerabilities. How can I go about? Give me 1 second. I've lost my mouse, and somebody's trying to get into the room. If I go here, so identification. Find vulnerabilities, analysis, make sure there's nothing wrong with the data. Triage, I have vulnerabilities, what do I do with them? Action, actually doing it, and reporting how you then kind of go from there, like, continuous improvement plans, telling the executive, ensuring that you're meeting SLAs and KPIs, etc. The thing that I want to talk about mostly today, and kind of what fits in with where we are with RankedRight today, is the triage and the action piece. That's the piece of the puzzle that we're trying to simplify, make more efficient, and essentially help reduce costs. So if we move on to the problem for a second, we've gone from a world 10 years ago or so, where you could scan your environment, and regardless of kind of the scanner that you used, and back then there wasn't many, and some were better than others, you're in a position where you had a handful of vulnerabilities, and you could go off and fix them if there was a patch available, or kind of accept the risk because nobody was really too worried about. Now you can scan your environment and you can identify thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions. That global bank, that global financial institution that I was talking about, no matter how many vulnerabilities they remediated within their kind of 1 month window, they always, at every scan, had over 6 million vulnerabilities in their environment. And that was just because, that was with what they believed was a good way of prioritizing and, the way that they kind of manage their program. It just isn't possible anymore to kind of fix everything at a certain scale. And the reason for it is this. So, and I'm just going to read this. 85% of vulnerabilities, when they're disclosed, get classified as a medium or high technical risk. But 76% of the time is wasted on fixing low business risk vulnerabilities. And there's a 20% average yearly increase on the number of disclosed vulnerabilities. So the problem is only getting worse. So if I break that down for a second, on the left-hand side, you have the 85% number being classed as a high technical risk. Technical risk being essentially the way that by default those scanners are kind of producing their vulnerability reports based on CVSS. That is a technical risk score. But because people by default are using that technical risk score, 76% of the time is wasted because they're actually fixing low business risk, low business context like vulnerabilities. So in that kind of, if you think of a Venn diagram, and in the middle there, like you end up having a situation whereby you're actually fixing vulnerabilities that you shouldn't care about, at least as a priority. And, you've actually fixed vulnerabilities that are never going to kind of cause an impact to you at all. So another client of mine around the WannaCry period, they had an issue with ransomware, and we took a list of their vulnerabilities from prior to the event occurring, and they had somewhere in the region of like 100,000 vulnerabilities. And the top like X% of those vulnerabilities, let's say 10%, were considered like CVSS 10s. And the Eternal Blue exploit was somewhere like much further down the list, because ultimately that was only classified as like an 8 point something and not a CVSS 10. So by their own admission, they fixed a bunch of CVSS 10s prior to the Eternal Blue exploit, which, arguably could be seen as one of the largest kind of scale attacks that we've ever seen, right, because of the impact that it had. They didn't even get to it because they weren't prioritizing in any other way but on the technical risk. And as we're seeing right now, and I'm in the process of writing a report with one of our business partners, with the increase of disclosed vulnerabilities is huge. And this year, we've seen even more vulnerabilities being released. And we suspect to see, by the end of this year, like an astronomical number compared to what we've seen in previous years. So I've mentioned a couple of times around CVSS and why it basically doesn't fit the bill. And this is a really good example as to why. So I mentioned before that so many vulnerabilities now are being kind of classified as that critical, high, medium style risk. And if you take a look over on the right-hand side, this particular vulnerability is the recent principal of vulnerability that Microsoft have. So what we've done here, and I pulled this the other day. I basically looked at our vulnerability intelligence to identify what the CVSS score has been and if it's changed, and the number of exploits that were available to us as part of our intel that an attacker could get, because we're not doing anything kind of secret, right? We're kind of pulling data from all various different sources, and whether or not it made any material change. CVSS doesn't account for change over time. Now, I've had many kind of conversations and many arguments about how CVSS base score may not, but the temporal and the kind of the environmental piece does. But if you look at the maths, actually the way that those two things work is it only ever helps to reduce the risk of a vulnerability. It never does anything to increase the risk of a vulnerability. And by default, there is no business priority in CVSS. When you start to think of CVSS as an algorithm, as something that is mathematical, starting to add your own priorities into that can start to feel a little bit overwhelming, especially when you have hundreds of thousands of vulnerabilities in your environment that may require some form of manual verification of. It is our belief and the belief of the industry as a whole now, from a vendor perspective, I guess, which, take with a pinch of salt, but it's true, that the CVSS score doesn't work in an evolving vulnerability landscape. As a day one measurement, vulnerability identified, what's the score? Fine. But from the 3rd of July to the 18th of July, that vulnerability has been weaponized from 4 exploits down to 20 exploits. And there has been no change in the way that vulnerability scanners by default are ranking those vulnerabilities. So that takes us into what we're doing with RankedRight. So we're building a triage tool that essentially ingests the vulnerability data from across the environment. It then provides, it then correlates that vulnerability data with vulnerability intelligence data that we gather from over 100 sources at least 4 times per day. It then exposes data points that allow the creation of triage rules so that you can set rules so that you can then figure out how you would go about resolving and remediating them and in which order they should be done according to your personal risk, your risk appetite, and then provides the ability to assign those vulnerabilities out to different members of the organization. Our ultimate aim, as it said in the title slide, is to help organizations reduce the administration of vulnerability management. I've been speaking with an organization recently that have 6 people who focus full-time on vulnerability management. And over the last 6-7 months, they've lost 2 or 3 people and had to rehire due to the stress and burnout that vulnerability management causes, right? Imagine getting alerts that you have this vulnerability. You have no idea who owns the asset. You didn't even know the asset existed to begin with. You don't know how to prioritize the vulnerability. You are worried that it could cause the next print schooler or WannaCry or not here or whatever. The stress is real, and I've lived this stress, right? I know that the stress is real. And what we're looking to do is essentially make it so that you don't have to spend countless hours in the spreadsheet. You set your rules based on what you believe is a priority for you, or if you work with kind of a managed service provider, they can set the rules for you, and then ultimately you assign those vulnerabilities out to individuals so that they can go off and fix them.
Thomas, without wanting to steal your thunder, are you going to talk more about the risk profile part with regards to creating your own risk profile when you go through the tool demo?
Yeah. Also no. So with the vulnerability intelligence data that we're gathering, we have a huge number of data points, and I'm going to kind of do 2 caveats now. First of all, this is just a very small proportion, and actually in the demo that I'm going to show, we've completely stripped it back to I think it's maybe 5 or 6. And the reason for that is we did have a hell of a lot of different filters and data points. But customers and pilots started to get really confused about all of the different options and triggers that they could use. So we've completely stripped back. But to give you an idea of how it works, as an example, one of the pilot customers wanted to, and this is from a real example, one of the pilot customers wanted to focus on what they considered to be their internal top risks. And they believed that kind of the CWE top 25 software vulnerabilities was kind of like a key thing that they wanted to drive within their organization, of which the latest one just got released yesterday. And we have integrated within our data. So internal top risks, the way that they created this was they created a rule that said, I only want to focus on my private state. I want to focus on where the vulnerabilities are aligned with the CWE top 25. I want to look at only the vulnerabilities where the access complexity is considered low. So that and this is utilizing part of the CVSS score. This is basically saying that you don't need to be physically on the device. You don't need to be on the adjacent network. You can be kind of remote from the on a separate kind of VLAN. And then sort it by the number of exploits that are available. Number of exploits is a very good kind of like measure to sort by on the basis that what it can show you, and maybe I don't know who else is on the call, but Ben can probably attest to this too. So when I was pen testing, I would run a scan and identify like different vulnerabilities that potentially we could utilize to gain access, and the ones that had the most exploits available were the ones that I was going to try first, because ultimately, if it didn't work, then I would try the next one. And if it didn't work, I'd try the next one.
Yeah, you just go down the list, work out why it's not working. See if you can change a couple of little bits inside the exploit and rerun it.
This is where things like building kind of your attacker profile, like the profile of attackers for your business, is really important, because in some cases you may have access to like certain types of data that it doesn't really matter like how long it takes. Like somebody to gain access, they're going to keep trying. A number of exploits may not be the route that you would want to go down. Whereas if all they want is to gain access for, I don't know, I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but essentially if all they're looking for is the speed of getting it done, number of exploits is a really good measure.
Low hanging fruit, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then sorting by kind of the first scene age ascending. So to kind of reiterate here, what we're doing is this organization said, I want to focus on vulnerabilities that impact my private estate that are considered or like listed within the top 25 CWEs, where the access complexity is considered low, and then order them by the number of exploits that are available for that particular vulnerability and when they were first seen. By doing this and by doing the creation of those rules, what we're able to do is provide hugely kind of customizable approach to vulnerability management. If you look at some of our competitors, who by the way do absolutely phenomenal technology, and also I've sold like my products, right, and I would recommend them to certain organizations, so I'm not slating them at all. But when you think about how they work, they essentially purchase as much vulnerability intelligence data as they can. They then hire hundreds of data scientists to create what they believe is the most kind of intricate way in which you can prioritize your vulnerabilities. And for some that will work. For the large enterprises, that will be the approach. Because ultimately you don't even have time to create the rules, let alone go off and start thinking about, doing anything else. But for a lot of organizations, our belief is within the mid-market, for a lot of organizations, they start to ask questions of, well, where's my risk in this? What is it that we're doing? What is it that we're doing as a business that impacts that score or that priority that you're creating? And the answer is there's nothing. And that's what we're doing. We're building a customizable platform that allows organizations to build their own ranking rules as opposed to relying on proprietary algorithms. It's actionable then because we know that those are focused for your business. And from a kind of mentality perspective, I've built this, I'm going to fix it. And from a cost-effective perspective, we've gone from doing the vulnerability scans, exporting it into an Excel spreadsheet or into some other tool, creating kind of, filters on data that, maybe they don't have and they have to pull from other sources and kind of build their own intelligence database. Ultimately, we're coming with like a turnkey solution, right? Give us your data, we'll give you our vulnerability intelligence, we'll expose those data points, and you can build what you need to and kind of provide it out to the rest of your organization. And that's the kind of message that we're going to the market with.
So with my salesman's hat on then, Thomas, am I right in thinking that as a cybersecurity professional, I could use this with multiple different firms, potentially within the same industry, and could I then look at creating an industry related template around that and focus on, say, for me, I've got 20 years in financial services. I could put together what I thought off the back of your RankedRight product was a good risk profile for that kind of company, and use that as a starting point for conversations then, or?
Yeah, so we essentially like work on two different like channels. Right? So the first is direct business. Like we go and sell this product to company 123, and they get onboarded and they build their own rules and do whatever they want. The second route is via kind of partners. So let's take you as an example. Like let's say you wanted to go to market with a solution that was focused purely for financial services. We would provide you with essentially your own RankedRight platform, and you could then onboard customers into that platform, their own accounts, and basically have like your own kind of spider of organizations, and do with it as you wish. So we signed an MSSP partner in the US called Lightstream. They're a cloud business at heart that have a security arm. They're focusing on like zero trust and zero trust networking, and they're utilizing RankedRight as part of their vulnerability management as a service program, augmenting it with their kind of zero trust stuff, and basically delivering the service through RankedRight, but providing us with their extra stream of data so that we can import it within.
Because I think I look at this from a different perspective from everyone else on the call, because I'm not technical. And what I see from a non-technical kind of sales position with your tool and Ben's tool is the fact that someone who isn't that technical, like me, but who's all right at driving business in, could effectively put something together where they've got a solution for the market. That's why I'm quite excited about it. But I'll be quiet now and shut my salesman's mouth for a bit.
Yeah, look, as I said, I've done countless kind of like feedback sessions over the last like 3 months. And the number one piece of feedback that people have kind of given us is keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate your user interface. Don't add too many rules and filters and this and that. Keep it super straightforward. So I know that I think at least one of you has seen the product in the past. It's probably going to look very different because of stuff that we've honestly like removed through to feedback, because people have said we don't need it right now. It's not something that is important to us, and we're building this based on like customer feedback and feedback from the industry. As an example, one of the biggest pieces of feedback that people have asked for is, which is not like feature specific at all, but it's webhooks. So that's like kind of like next on the agenda for us to provide webhooks for alerting. So yeah. Anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to before we go into the demo, does anybody have any questions about kind of vulnerability management holistically, or should I just go straight into the demo? No,
I'm not going to talk again, so I'll let you carry on, Thomas.
I have a couple of questions, but I think it's we may wait after the demo, because some of the questions might be answered by the demos.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll ask that.
So, do you guys see the browser window? Okay, great. So I will log in. So I'll kind of tell you how I've set up the environment in advance so that there's no like smoke and mirrors, if that makes sense. So the first thing that an organization will be asked to do when they like first come in and like get onboarded is to upload either a vulnerability file or an asset inventory file. Now, the reason why we don't force the asset inventory file to begin with is due to the fact that and I mentioned it before, we're extracting asset information from the vulnerability scan data anyway. However, what you'll see here within our kind of asset management interface is you have the ability to create kind of tags and to see, and these are all kind of user definable, right? So you can say, You can type in whatever you want here. Like if you wanted to say that this had, for example, let's say like Adobe running on it, like you could do that, and you can do it for whatever. Doing that for like 4,000 assets, which one of our customers have, is the biggest pain in their backside. So you have the ability to upload an asset file. Next, we would then say upload your scan data, and then your scan data comes in. And I've already I did it this afternoon. I uploaded like an example Nessus scan file. We currently support the Tenable suite of products like Nessus and Tenable.io. We also support Qualys, we support Rapid7, and this week we announced support for Fortinet applications. So one of our customers is utilizing Fortinet endpoints within their estate, and they wanted to take the data from those and import it within RankedRight. It's kind of like a key part of our strategy. Somebody comes on board and says, hey, we use OpenVAS, or hey, we use, for example, Ronin. If somebody came around and said we use Ronin, then we would work on creating a connector so that you could ingest data in there. Also on the roadmap. Go on.
So it's going to happen.
Yeah, it will happen. It will. And then the kind of next step of the puzzle on that piece, by the way, is that API connectivity. So instead of uploading your data, we're going to just kind of ingest it as it becomes available. So what happens is you upload your data and you're kind of faced with the problem, right? The problem statement I gave before. There are too many vulnerabilities. So in this case, there are 7,284 vulnerabilities across, let me just double check, across 27 assets. And that's one scan, right? So what we've done is we've created two kind of built-in rules. I don't know, do you guys see this drop down? Yeah, so we've built two built-in rules. So the first one is the removal of noise. So what noise is essentially kind of informational risk issues, any vulnerabilities that don't hold any kind of impact or risk at all, and any vulnerabilities that are findings, let's call them, that essentially are not they're not going to cause any form of damage when it comes to confidentiality, integrity, or availability. Nessus, in particular, is very noisy when it comes to like telling you about all of the weird and wonderful things it's found in the environment. So the first thing to kind of note here is we've gone from over 7,000 vulnerabilities down to 2,900. So we've more than half the vulnerability list. The other one that we have is exploitable. So as I mentioned, we gather data at least 4 times a day from over 100 different sources, whether that be like GitHub, or kind of from the Microsoft bulletins, or from ExploitDB, or Metasploit, or SaintDB, or wherever. Like the list goes on and on and on. And we then correlate those against the vulnerabilities that are within our database to basically tell you if exploits are available. But we also go kind of like a step further than that. What we're also able to do, so if you take a look at this vulnerability here, there's a Firefox vulnerability. What we're also able to do is not just tell you that it's exploitable, but the number of exploits that are also available for that particular vulnerability as well. And we also go a step further than that. And this is kind of where we've been talking about what are we showing and what are we not showing, and trying to kind of get that kind of balance. We also are able to provide where those exploits are available, right? So that your team can go off, download them, and review them to understand like how they work. And then the next thing, which is another step further, is we're not just providing you the fact that it's exploitable and the number of exploits and where those exploits are, but we're also able to provide you on, I would say, at least 60% of cases, working Snort, Yara, and Suricata rules for your IDS and IPS device, so that you can do like virtual patching and hotfixing across the environment, so that you don't have to go about remediating and installing a patch, which reduces downtime, which keeps your exec happy, keeps happy, so on and so forth. The remediation advice is a little messy at the moment. We're about to go through a big UI UX revamp. We obviously have all of the information about what that particular. So here's an example, right? We know that it's a Windows machine, so we shouldn't be kind of providing you the Gen 2 remediation advice or the Debian remediation advice. It should be specific to that specific. By the way, I manually tagged that. I actually don't think this is Windows. So which is why there's no Windows there. So it'll all be context aware. So that's the triage view kind of from a default perspective. You can see exploitable vulnerabilities, you can remove the noise, but then we can start building custom stuff. So one of the really interesting things that I've seen one of our customers do recently is create rules that they know are not going to return any data. But what they want to do is have the rule available so that they can check it like on a regular basis. Because if data does become available within that rule, then it's a big problem. So the example I'm going to give here is exploitable, but non-patchable. You may have noticed when we were going through the presentation earlier, that when we were looking at the number of exploits available for that printer school of vulnerability, that we actually had exploits available before we had a CVSS score. And what that typically means is that you typically see that on 0-day vulnerabilities. So vulnerabilities that have just been announced that everybody's rushing to try and remediate and fix and is working through the concept. Basically like vulnerability intelligence data that tries to catch up with everything. So what we're looking for here, typically when we talk about exploitable but non-patchable vulnerabilities, is vulnerabilities that have just been announced and there's no working way at the moment to patch them. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it across a specific tag because I know that this works. So we're saying we want to only focus on like our router estate. We want to order them by the number of public exploits that are available, and you can like ascend or descend them. And I'm only really bothered about anything that's considered a CVSS 6 and above. An exploit is available for it, and no patch is available for it. And then what you can do is you can save that rule. And now, oh, there we go. I didn't realize it did that. Now you have that rule saved within the platform so that you can come back to it. But then we can go another step further, right? So we can then say, hey, we have a guy in the team whose job it is to focus on these kind of blue sky thinking thoughts, right? And I'm not going to create the user, but what you can then do is assign him or her that particular rule. So when they log into the platform, they only see in their view this rule. They can't see any of the other data. Now, if we go back to the rules to the view for a second, let's create a new rule that talks about Windows vulnerabilities that are exploitable. So we can say we want to look at Windows. We have a slight bug here, as you can probably see. Windows, we want to see if there's an exploit available for them. We want to order them by the number of public exploits available. And when we first, in fact, I was going to say when we first saw them, but I've only uploaded one file. Obviously, we're aware every time we upload data and we store like how long that data has been available, so that we can then start to say, well, this is your oldest risk in your environment. If we say risk age, that's when the vulnerability was first disclosed. And I will do minimum CVSS score of greater than 4. Let's assume it was like a PCI environment, right? They only care about medium risk and above. Press save. Hopefully this will work. So now we have a list of 339 vulnerabilities, Windows vulnerabilities that are exploitable, that are above a CVSS of 4, and that are ordered by the number of public exploits. So this particular vulnerability here has 31 known ways of exploiting it. You'll notice, by the way, that this has faults. It's also another bug. But that's in a demo environment. In the production, I basically broke, I'll be honest, I broke the demo environment today. Because I'm not a developer, but I like to think that I am. So yeah, that then shows you, the vulnerability. You can, as I showed before, assign those vulnerabilities off to people in your organization. And then this is when you start to think about, well, what do we do with them? So we have 3 actions here. The first action is accepting a risk. So let's say this vulnerability here, you didn't really care about it. It wasn't important. It was something that you were happy to accept. You can come in here, you can accept the risk, and say like, thanks for everything, press accept. And then what happens is that then is cleared from the view of the analyst who's kind of going through and, figuring out what it is that they need to do. And is stored within like a smart list, which is here, which is in development. It'll be out next week. Essentially, everything that'll be kind of marked as accepted or remediated or deferred will be in there. So the actions that we have are accept the risk, remediate the vulnerability. So this should be fixed, or defer. And with defer, it's essentially, when do you want the vulnerability to then reappear, and you can do that. And then what you have the ability to do is kind of come back and reopen these vulnerabilities. So as an example, the one that I said accepted, let's say, I've logged in as like the administrator. Don't be stupid. This is a big risk. You reopen that vulnerability up. That would then be in there. And not only is it in there, but we also have like the audit trail of what people are saying about this particular vulnerability. We have the ability to export the vulnerabilities as well that have been kind of created by the triage rules in kind of a CSV or XLS format, so that if somebody doesn't have access to the platform or for whatever reason they need to kind of deal with it offline, they can. The CSV and XLS kind of brings in all of the data from the scan file, but also our extended data from our vulnerability intelligence as well, so that they have it all kind of in front of them. And yeah, that's the product demo. Are there any questions?